I'm just here to inform you about American literature, about the current state of gay rights in America. I am not here to change your mind or push any ideology or religion on you. That said, you are welcome to disagree with me. I did bring paper and pencils if anyone wants to have questions or something like that during the presentation. You can feel free to write them down if that helps. You can draw a stick figure of me with die written above it if you like. But there will be time if you have questions at the end. But I'd ask to save questions till the end. And first, a little note on the language that I'm going to be using. This is not a gender theory presentation. This is not a university level presentation. However, I wanted to point out I'll be using the word queer instead of LGBTQIA+. Queer is a quicker way to say all of that. And in the LGBTQIA+ community, the word queer is used as an umbrella term. That means it's a broad term that covers a lot of different orientations and gender expressions. It's a way to describe identity, and it's also a way of reclamation. Many times, the word queer in English actually means strange or unusual, and it was used in a very derogatory or offensive way against people who identified that way. So there's a current movement to reclaim that word as something positive, or at the very least neutral. Finally, it's used as a political statement for people to express themselves and how they express their sexual orientation and or gender identity. Speaking of sex and gender, I'll be using the term sex to describe a series of genetic and physiological traits. That means, in terms of biology, most organisms have an X chromosome and a Y chromosome, or two X chromosomes. So I'm referring to biological and physical sex. Gender is the manner in which an individual expresses their masculinity or femininity or somewhere along that spectrum. It's very much tied to culture and it's very individual, but it may or may not have anything to do with biological sex. So, clear as mud, clear as mud. And today, as you may have gathered from the information about the presentation, we're going to be talking about American literature from the very beginning of the original 13 colonies up until the 21st century. So we'll be starting with The Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. This is Puritan literature, and it's from the sermon was originally preached in the 1700s. And we'll be ending with modern times with the beloved children's story And Tango Makes Three. So, and this is the part of the show I'm going to be talking about Puritan literature. I'll be talking a lot about Christianity. I want to emphasize again, I'm not here to convert you to Christianity. I myself am a recovering fundamentalist Christian, but I am just going to be giving you information about Puritan literature. Many people think that the first European settlers in the United States, or the colonies at the time, were these very uptight, very stern and strict religious people. Actually, the Pilgrims, the very first people who came in the 1600s, the very first people they're called the Pilgrims, and they actually were much more relaxed than the Puritans. The Pilgrims were facing a religious oppression. They didn't agree with the Church of England or the Anglican Church, and they decided rather than try to fix everything or try to get them to stop telling us to worship as we want, we're just going to leave. And when they came to the New World, they actually wanted to have a more personal relationship with God. That was the thing that they didn't like about the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church was very political, it was very corrupt. They didn't like that, and they wanted to have a stronger relationship with God, and they wanted the freedom to express it that way. After the Pilgrims had established the new colonies, the Puritans came. The Puritans were a little bit different. They also saw problems with the Anglican Church. However, they wanted to change everyone around them to make them exactly like themselves. So a lot of people think that the early Americans were just all like the Puritans. And actually the Puritans, that was a completely different sect. They came later. And nevertheless, they were the ones that are responsible for much of the writings that we associate with American literature. Interestingly it had this idea of God is very distant, and you can only get to him by talking to the priest. Whereas the Puritans wanted to say, no, this is a personal God. This is a God who wants you to, is interested in your life and wants to have a relationship with you. So, although we give them a lot of justified criticisms for being too harsh and religious, they actually were, their hearts were in the right place, we might say. That said, I have a quotation here from Nathaniel Ward. The thing is, even in this time, people started to mix up religion and politics. So this is, for those of you who are not native speakers, this may be a little bit harder English for you. But Nathaniel Ward was one of the original Puritan leaders of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which grew into the state of Massachusetts. I dare take upon me to be the herald of New England, and so far as to proclaim to the world, in the name of the colony, that all familists, antinomians, Anabaptists, and other enthusiasts shall have free liberty to keep away from us, and such as will come to be gone as fast as they can, the sooner the better. The familists, antinomians, Anabaptists, and other enthusiasts, these are different sects of Christianity. They were people who were Christians, and they had different practices with their dressing, with how they led their worship services that were a little bit different. Nathaniel Ward is basically saying here, if they don't do it our way, they can get the hell away as soon as possible, quite literally. And I would also like to read, in case anyone is curious, what sermons sounded like. One of the most famous Puritan sermons is called Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. And if any of you have heard the term fire and brimstone to describe how Christians preach, it comes from passages like this. The observation from the words that I would now insist upon is this: there is nothing that keeps wicked men at any one moment out of hell but the mere pleasure of God. By the mere pleasure of God, I mean his sovereign pleasure, his arbitrary will, restrained by no obligation, hindered by no manner of difficulty, any more than if nothing else than God's mere will had in the least degree or in any respect whatsoever in the hand in the preservation of wicked men one moment. In modern English, there is nothing, absolutely nothing, that keeps people out of hell, except that God feels like keeping them out of hell for that given moment. Any moment, God can say, poof, and you can end up in hell. This sermon takes up about 10 pages of this book, and it is all like that. Great fun. People actually passed out and fainted when they were hearing that sermon when it was originally preached. So, that was Puritan literature. Great fun. The next important phase is revolutionary literature. Those of you who know a bit about America know that after the colonies were established, there was a war to throw off British rule. I'm not going to go into the history of that, but at this period of time, there's very little fiction that's produced. There's very little beautiful literature that's produced. Most of what the focus was on was the founding fathers using their freedom to try to convince other people that, yes, revolution was the best way, and how exactly to establish the new country. So it's books like Common Sense or The Rights of Man by Thomas Paine. I'll be perfectly honest, this is hard even for me to read, and I grew up speaking English, so I'll understand if you aren't interested in checking it out. But there was a lot of philosophy, a lot of essay writing, not so much for entertainment purposes. Then we get to my personal favorite period of American literature, Romanticism. This period starts in the early 1800s. The United States has been established. They're going through and starting to feel more comfortable, not such a fight for survival like at the beginning. But writing starts to be a way to entertain people. If any of you know the legend of Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman, that was written during this time period. Those of you who know Edgar Allan Poe, any of his work, he started writing at the very end of this period. So we start to see more that writing is a way to express ourselves and celebrate how beautiful the world is around us, how great are destined to become is the person you decide to be. Something that is very important to American thinking, and it comes out in American literature, is this idea of self-determination. Basically, you have the power to be the captain of your own life and decide how your life is going to go. And Ralph Waldo Emerson also was a huge fan of the first openly gay American author, as openly gay as he could be. In the 1800s, gay sex was still punishable by death, and so obviously he wasn't super open and out about his sexuality, but his most famous poem, Leaves of Grass, is full of sexual overtones. He also, you may know him if you've seen the movie The Dead Poets Society with Robin Williams and Ethan Hawke. Walt Whitman is the beloved poet for the professor. And here I believe in the film, if my memory serves, they have one scene where Robin Williams is trying to get them to talk about, I too am not a bit tamed. I too am a bit untranslatable. I sound my barbaric yawp over the roofs of the world. By the way, from an English language perspective, yawp is not a very common word. Its most famous use is actually in this poem, Leaves of Grass. It means a very big shout, a very big and deep shout. In other news, not I nor anyone else can travel that road for you. You must travel it by yourself. Again, you start to see the ideas of self-determination, self-reliance, and self-awareness that you are the one who decides how your destiny is going to be. And of course, the positivity that Americans are so well known for. Keep your face always towards the sunshine, and the shadows will fall behind you. Walt Whitman also wrote the poem, Oh Captain, My Captain. Those of you who know the film. This is when Robin Williams jumps up on the desk and starts to recite the poem, if you will allow me. Oh Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting, while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. This poem was written at the death of Abraham Lincoln. Walt Whitman, during the Civil War, was very active politically in Washington, D.C., and he identified a lot with Abraham Lincoln and Abraham Lincoln's work, so he was very strongly moved when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. And he wrote that poem as a reaction to Abraham Lincoln's death. And Walt Whitman also represents a transition in American literature from Romanticism into Transcendentalism. The notable thing that's going to be more important as we talk more about more openly queer authors. Transcendentalism is a movement that says there's still emphasis on the beauty of nature, and there's still overall positive, but you see authors starting to question society and see that maybe people aren't as good as we think they are, or maybe what society tells us is true doesn't have to be true. The most famous transcendentalist author is Nathaniel Hawthorne. He wrote the book The Scarlet Letter, and I don't know what this movie's title would be translated to in other languages, but if you've seen the film Easy A with Emma Stone, that's a movie that's an adaptation of The Scarlet Letter, actually. The story goes that a woman in Puritan times is found to have gotten pregnant outside of marriage. They don't know who the father of the baby is, but the book opens with her standing on a platform, and they're deciding what her punishment is going to be. She's carrying her baby in her arms. She won't say who the father is, so they tell her that she has to wear a red letter A for adultery or sex outside of marriage, on her clothes, and they banish her to live closer to the woods, outside of the main village. So the themes in that book. Hawthorne wrote this book after he discovered that his great-grandfather was one of the judges in the Salem witch trials. And when he found out that such a dark thing happened in his personal family history, that made him really question Christianity, question society, and how something like that could happen. So this book is very famous for examining hypocrisy, religion, gender norms, and societal expectations, as well as how we deal with guilt. The English of the book is a little society, there was nothing that made her feel like she belonged to it. So she would go into town to buy things and to manage her business, but she never felt like she fit into society. She stood apart from moral interests. She was separated from what everyone else thought was important. Yet she was close beside them, like a ghost that revisits the familiar fireside and can no longer make itself seen or felt. So basically, the way people are treating her, the way she's separate from society, she feels like there's an invisible wall between her and others, and she can see them but can't interact with them. Both of these movements stopped in about 1860-1861, which is when the American Civil War began. And all of this time that we had to enjoy life and examine different aspects of our personhood and society came to a crashing halt with the beginning of the war. And from that point on, the Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1866. And from then, we stopped having time or interest to philosophize and think about abstract things. We just had to focus on what was right in front of us. You start to see themes of naturalism, just looking exactly at how things are. Those of you who are familiar with Mark Twain, if you're not, I can have some of his. I have his book with me. Yes, here we go. He wrote Tom Sawyer and Huckleberry Finn. These books are also banned in many places because there's a fair bit of racist language in them, a lot of words to describe black people that are no longer okay to use. But he's known for having a very simple style and just describing things exactly as they are. There's no hidden meanings, no metaphors, just telling things like it is. And then, while we thought that the world might have been getting better at some point, soon afterwards the First World War started, then there was the Great Depression, then there was the Second World War, and we get more into modernism and more, wow, the world is really a messed up place. We now have the tools and the understanding to see how bad everything is, and let's comment on it and see if maybe we can fix it. So, I promise not to go too much more into this, but this is a quick summary slide of all of the different phases that I've mentioned of American literature. And now I'm going to talk about two excellent things in the modern era. The Harlem Renaissance began in 1919, right after the First World War. And this is the first time that it celebrated people of color. It's a whole movement dedicated to black people celebrating their culture, their history, and writing in their own genre. If you read books from that era, the characters are all black. It's not just like white people with a token black person. Black people are having their own lives, their own discussions, and they're speaking to each other in black vernacular, in the way that black people talk. We also have people of color writing across genres. Previously, during the 1800s, there were some very famous black authors, most notably Frederick Douglass. These were escaped slaves who taught themselves how to read and write and publish. But now, in the Harlem Renaissance, we have black people writing poetry, writing novels, writing all kinds of different books and treatises. We even have Alain Locke, who I'm going to get to in a moment, writing books on philosophy and starting entire new literary genres. We also have the first examples of intersectionality. While women was openly gay, not too many people started to write about the struggles of being gay until the Harlem Renaissance. We have black authors like James Baldwin and Langston Hughes writing about growing up in Christian homes, growing up being black, also being gay and not knowing how to reconcile that with other parts of their life. So, like I said, these are the most famous first openly gay American authors, or at least authors who openly outed themselves. For obvious reasons, they were very careful with how they phrased it about themselves. But we have Alain Locke, the founder of the Harlem Renaissance, James Baldwin and Langston Hughes. James Baldwin wrote mostly essays and wrote for newspapers, but he also wrote some poetry and some novels. Langston Hughes was a poet who wrote one notable novel. Truman Capote wrote the book Breakfast at Tiffany's, and Lorraine Hansberry was a playwright. She was more active in the civil rights movement. She was a bit younger, and she wasn't alive during the give me one moment. He's writing here a letter from Harlem from 1960. Another thing of note about James Baldwin, he was very active in the civil rights movement, and he believed so strongly in advocating for the rights of black people. He didn't write as much about his sexuality, but it was definitely known that he was out and gay. The projects in Harlem are hated. They are hated almost as much as policemen, and that is saying a great deal. And they are hated for the same reason. Both reveal unbearably the real attitude of the white world. No matter how many liberal speeches are made, no matter how lofty editorials are written, no matter how many civil rights commissions are set up. The projects are hideous, of course, there being a law apparently respected throughout the world that popular housing shall be as cheerless as a prison. They are lumped all over Harlem, colorless, bleak, high, and revolting. Here you see, this is technically civil rights reporting. It's nonfiction journalistic literature. And you see that they were writing in a very direct way to criticize society. And this is the time, the Harlem Renaissance giving black people a voice and a genre of their own, and the civil rights movement being the first movement to do these things. It's mostly focused on people of color. While it's been said that this is the foundation for the gay rights and women's liberation movements, the focus is mostly on the rights of black people. And obviously women's or queer issues stood on the shoulders of this, but it was primarily racial inequality that they were addressing. There were political and civil activities, it was not only writing. And so the Harlem Renaissance was a time when people were writing about their struggles, and in the civil rights movement, people are acting. Furthermore, we have the first examples of backlash for a movement being too controversial, violent, etc. So there were many riots where people ended up dying, or people ended up being killed by police, property was destroyed. It was not a peaceful time in life at all, unfortunately. This is also the time when, what obviously the most famous writer and speaker of this time is Martin Luther King Jr., which his sermons are available in our book about American sermons, and we also have this letter from a Birmingham jail in our reporting civil rights book. And now I'm going to change topics a little bit. There is obviously a strong undercurrent of Christianity in America, and there has been from the beginning. Does anyone know, can anyone think of why conservative Christianity is so anti-gay? Like, there's lots of sins, right? There's don't steal, don't drink, don't sleep with your neighbor's wife, don't be jealous, lots of stuff. But why, any thoughts on why being gay is such a big deal? Yeah?
Maybe because in the Bible they always just talk about men and women, and also started with Adam and Eve.
Okay.
Because they only take like different passages and single sentences and misinterpret them into God only wanting like humans to be with woman and woman.
That's a great thought. That's a great thought. And I think that's about 98% of what it is. So basically, that the Bible is only ever talking about men and women from the beginning with Adam and Eve up through the rest of it, and also individual verses being taken out of context. That is fair, and those are definitely true. There's a reason why it's just a man and a woman in the Bible, though. And there's a reason why those verses exist about homosexuality being a sin and such. Any thoughts? Sweet, because I have thoughts. And this is one benefit that I believe I have because I was raised in a conservative Christian family. I went to conservative Christian schools, and for all of their flaws, those schools were very focused on rationality, believe it or not. They wanted to explain it to us. So again, if I can give you a presentation of their explanations for why being gay is such a problem, or why same-sex relationships are such a problem. A lot of it comes from direct quotations from the Bible, and if you believe that you're supposed to read the Bible literally as it's written, then obviously, not accounting for cultural context, some of those verses are pretty clear about what the truth is, according to the Bible. And the biblical view of marriage, as you said, is exactly right. It's one man, one woman. And there are different verses in the Bible, such as a man shall leave his father and mother and become one with his wife, and the two will become one flesh. There's no Bible verses that talk about a man and a man becoming one flesh, or a woman and a woman, or two non-binary people. And there's a very famous, very clear, in its way, very clear passage about what marriage is. Marriage is meant to, in the Christian mindset, be a picture of Jesus Christ and his relationship with the church, with his people that he's called to be in a relationship with him. And the Apostle Paul actually says, I'm speaking of a great mystery, but this becoming one flesh in marriage is a picture of Christ and the church. The basic foundation of Christianity is that humans are incomplete. Some people would say that that's because we're sinful. Some people say that that's because we're not God, like we're a creation of God, so we're not meant to be complete. But the basic premise of Christianity is humans are incomplete on their own. They need God to make them complete, to realize their eternal and their earthly purpose. Again, I'm just saying what Christianity is. You are free to accept, reject, think this is stupid, whatever you like. That's between you and your conscience. But if you take a man and a woman who are biologically, sexually different, that's a picture of how we humans are not complete without a relationship with God. This is the logic of the Bible. And so then to say that two people who are sexually the same, like two men or two women, not to get too graphic, but we're saying we can complete ourselves. If you take this logic, basically, humans don't need God, we can be okay on our own. Again, that's the logic that was told to me in my fundamentalist Christian schools. There is a rationality to it if you accept those premises. But again, now it's on you and your conscience to do what you like with that. And now, why is Don't Say Gay such a big deal today? As those of you who are not living under rocks, or those of you who follow world news, know that in the last few years in particular, there's been a lot of legislation in the United States about homosexuality, especially as it comes to youth. A lot of it shows up in terms of book banning and control of school curricula. Usually people will cite one of four reasons. One is protecting children, clutches pearls, wanting children to not be exposed to things that are above their maturity level. People also mention religious freedom. If they don't believe that it's valid to have a relationship between two men or between two women, or to identify as a gender that's not male or female, they don't believe that they should be forced to have their children grow up thinking that. They say a lot about Christian nation. I know myself, so I'm going to shut up about that one in particular. And there's the idea of limited government. I'm going to take a little bit of more of a deep dive into showing how this works in our thinking. I made this slide crazy on purpose because it takes a little bit of what we call mental gymnastics to make sense of it. So basically, if I could boil the American mentality down to one truth, Americans believe that our basic freedom is to live our life and exercise our rights. In contrast, my husband and I were talking about this. He's European, and he said much of the European mentality is that you have a basic right to live. Americans would say you have a basic right to freedom. So if you accept that as your premise, then you also have these things branching off of that. First, you're not going to trust things that restrict you and restrict that freedom. If you think that this is your basic, most intrinsic right, anything that tries to threaten that right is going to be a big threat to you. Furthermore, you do your best to be on your own, to be free, and keep yourself away from bad influences. Plus, Americans are human like anyone else, and we have two basic human conditions. Anything that is new or different is scary and threatening, and we are going to focus on taking care of ourselves. We are very focused on individualism, including our little community that we've allowed into ourselves. That shows up Like, you can do it. I don't know why, it sounded fun for them. But based on me, like, you can do whatever you want, live your life, do whatever you want for the world, but don't do it where I can see it. If it's too close to me, then that interferes with my freedom, and I don't like that. And also, this is I don't think it's strictly an American thing, but I believe that being right is the most important. That's something that most people would think. Finally, Americans believe that American parents can raise their own children best. To be perfectly honest with you, I think this is of all of these other thoughts, this is the one that I can identify with the most. If someone tells me that school is going to be the main person taking care of my child, and then the government is going to be the one that's influencing the most of what my child thinks, that would make me stop and think, to be honest with you. But so Americans, and I don't think we're alone in this, believe that parents, not school, should teach morality. That really a child's basic foundation for morality should start in their home, whatever their home may look like. And also, our entire country was founded on having limited government, not giving government the power to completely dictate every detail of our lives. So there's anything that looks like a big government, we're going to reject that. And we also get scared of government schools teaching morals. And if the government takes over our schools and teaching our children, what will they do next? If they start to force their ideas onto my children, what if they then start to have all my children go to war? Or what if they say that you can't be a Christian anymore, you only have to be an atheist, or something like that. So I'm not saying that's correct logic, I'm just saying that that is how the logical slide goes. I don't believe that, for what it's worth, but no one asked what I believe. This is the book that, according to the American Library Association, has been the most challenged or banned in the last 30 years. This is just a book about human development. It's hard to read, but it's intended for ages 16 and up. She also wrote, this author, Robbie Harris, also wrote a book for younger kids that's not so detailed, but basically it talks about relationships, biological changes that happen in puberty, and it also has sections about how adults can talk to children in ways that are dangerous. So it's intended to equip and empower children to understand their bodies as they go through puberty, and also to protect them from predators. But obviously there are images in this book. You can see that it's intended as like a comic book. So there were people that complained that it shows child pornography, that it is grooming children for pedophilia, and a bunch of other things. The thing is, it's a book that is intended to equip children to be able to recognize when people are treating them badly and to understand what's going on. So unfortunately, it's still been banned more than just about any other book. On the other hand, it's not gone away yet, so I have hope. And I remember when this book came out. This book came out around the year 2000, I believe, and it's a cute illustrated story about two male penguins in the Bronx Zoo who adopted a penguin chick the egg was rejected by its mother, and these two male penguins, who apparently are a bonded pair, just like a male and female penguin, took it upon themselves to raise this little chick. They raised the egg and incubated it on their feet like a female penguin would. But obviously this is a way to subvert the youth and to get ideologies about homosexual families out into mainstream, and therefore it's very dangerous. Obviously. That was sarcasm, by the way. Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama also have the highest teen pregnancy rates, the highest STI rates, highest dropout rates, highest poverty rates, and they have, I believe Mississippi has a state law that says any sex education that goes on in schools must be abstinence only focused. That means that the curriculum teaches that the only way to not pass or get sexually transmitted infections and not undergo a teenage pregnancy is through abstinence, which means not having sex. And not that they're wrong. Like, it's true that if you don't have sex, you won't get an STI and you won't get pregnant. It's just not tremendously realistic. And that's my public health degree talking. But we can talk about this a lot. I have lots more maps elsewhere that I can show you if you're interested. But we are coming to the end of the presentation. I just wanted to show you, if you're interested in reading more, we have all of these authors available in the foreign language literature department of this library. There are also, many of these works have been translated, and works by these authors have been translated into Czech and other languages as well, and they're available in the library in general. Interestingly enough, on this list, Alice Walker, Stephen Chomsky, Roxane Gay, and David Levithan are Americans. The rest of these authors are British or Irish. Virginia Woolf is Irish, sorry ma'am. And most of the books that are specifically queer literature related are actually from Britain, at least if you're looking at English language literature. England is a bit more progressive than the United States. They overturned anti-sodomy laws much earlier than we did. In case anyone was wondering, it was in 2003 that there was a federal law in the United States that said you cannot enforce anti-gay sex laws, anti-sodomy laws. There are still 7 U.S. states where there's a law that says it is illegal to have sex for some reason other than procreation, including gay sex. It's actually on the laws and still active, has not been repealed. However, because of the federal law that was passed in 2003, you cannot act on those laws. On the other hand, in Britain, there's no laws against sex that's not for procreative purposes. So there's your fun legal fact for the day. As I said, these books are available, and these authors are available in the foreign language literature department. I have them over there if you're interested in looking at any of them. And I also want to show my sources. And I want to point out a couple of things. I do believe fundamentalist Christians have earned their bad reputation, in my opinion. However, I still identify as a Christian, and I still think that it's mostly from being misguided and really the basic human instincts of wanting to belong in a group and stuff like that. We can talk more about that at another time. But if you're interested in seeing that truly not all Christians think in these crazy ways, I recommend 2 podcasts. Theology in the Raw is, and it's a podcast where the host who has his master's degree in theology interviews all sorts of people. He's interviewed gay activists, he's interviewed former porn stars. He really talks in a very reasonable way and lets people of all types explain their life story. And he takes on many of the most controversial issues. He has a lot of content specifically about queer issues, and I think it's really well done. Same thing with the flip side, but with Noah Filipiak. Sometimes he rambles a bit, and so he can be a little harder to follow. But he also attempts to challenge the most difficult and controversial topics. So if you're interested in seeing what Christians who are not crazy fundamentalists, if I can say that, say, I really recommend these 2 podcasts. There's also a documentary about purity culture in the Christian church in America and some of what Europeans might see as crazy approaches to dating and sexuality. There's a documentary available for free on YouTube. I Survived, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, and if you put that into the search engine, it will come up. And these are my other sources. With that, thank you very much for being the few, the proud,